Welcome to Career Ambitions, the podcast for corporate professionals who are ready to stop waiting and take control of their careers. If you're tired of sending applications into the void, wondering why you're not getting interviews, and watching opportunities go to people who are no more qualified than you're in the right place, my friends. I'm Joanne Sparrow, former HR director turned career coach, and I've spent more than 2 decades sitting on the other side of the hiring table. That means I know exactly what hiring managers think and what they say behind closed doors. Join me on this episode of Career Ambitions, where I'm pulling back the curtains on the hiring process and unapologetically exposing the truths job seekers are never told to give you the strategy and confidence to move your career forward and land your dream job or promotion. Have you ever walked out of an interview and thought, I know I'm good at what I do, but I don't think they really understood me? Or maybe you've had this experience. You get the classic interview question, tell me about your strengths and weaknesses. And suddenly your brain freezes. You know you have strengths. You know you have experience and value. But in that moment, you start performing instead of communicating. You try to sound impressive, polished, and try not to say the wrong thing. That is exactly where so many job seekers lose their power in the interview process. But the goal is not to just sound good. The goal is to help the person across the table from you understand where you do your best work. Not just what you can do, but where you can thrive, where you create the most value, where your energy, strengths, skills, and impact come together. That is what we're talking about today, your zone of genius, and more importantly, how to use it in your career story, in networking conversations, and in interviews so that the right people can see your value. Welcome back to Career Ambitions, the podcast for corporate professionals who want to stop feeling stuck, overlooked, or underpositioned and start making career moves with clarity, confidence, and strategy. I'm Joanne Sparrow, former HR director turned career coach. I've spent more than 20 years inside corporate HR, sitting on the other side of the hiring process. I've interviewed thousands of candidates. I've coached hiring managers and influenced hiring decisions. I've read thousands of resumes, sat in debriefs, watched the politics, and have seen how decisions are really made behind closed doors. And now, I help job seekers understand what is actually happening in the hiring process so they can stop guessing and start positioning themselves as the top talent they are. Today's episode is about a concept that sounds simple, but can really change the way you talk about yourself. Your zone of genius. But we're not talking about it in a fluffy way. We're going to talk about how it shows up on your resume, in your LinkedIn profile, during your networking conversations and interviews, and your overall career story. Because here's what I know from years of hiring. The strongest candidates are not always the ones with the longest resumes. They are the ones who understand where they create value and can communicate that clearly. There is a question I love, and I wish more candidates prepared for a version of it. And that question is, what gives you energy at work? And what takes away energy from you? Now, on the surface, it sounds like a soft question. It sounds reflective, conversational, and maybe a little casual. But from a hiring perspective, this question is incredibly powerful because it tells me something that a resume cannot always tell. It tells me where you are likely to thrive. It tells me what kind of work environment will bring out your best and what parts of your role may drain you, frustrate you, or eventually lead you to a disengagement. And it tells me whether the role, the manager, the team, and the expectations are actually aligned with how you work best. Years ago, some hiring managers used to ask questions about their zone of genius, and they might say, have you heard of the zone of genius? And then ask, can you walk me through your zones? The idea behind this is that we all have different zones, a zone of genius, a zone of excellence, a zone of competence, and a zone of incompetence. Now, the challenge with that language in an interview is obvious. The moment you ask someone about their zone of incompetence, they get defensive. Of course they do. They're in an interview and they're trying to be selected. They're trying to manage impressions and they're wondering, is this a trick question? And suddenly, instead of giving you an honest answer, they start giving you a careful answer. But when you ask, what gives you energy and what takes energy away from you, the whole conversation changes. It feels less like judgment and more like alignment. It feels like the interviewer is saying, I want to understand where you do your best work. And that is the conversation every job seeker should be prepared to have. Because the truth is, hiring is not only about whether you can do the job, it's about whether the role makes sense for you. And you get to decide that. Whether your strengths match the work, whether your energy matches the environment, and whether your story matches the opportunity. So, what is the zone of genius? Well, let's break this down. Your zone of genius is not simply what you're good at. That's important, but it is not the whole picture. There are many things you may be really good at that drain the life out of you. And there may be things you can do well because you have experience, but you would rather not want to build the next 5 years of your career around them. These are skills you developed because you had to, not because they represent your highest contribution. That is why this concept really matters. Your zone of genius is the work that combines your natural strengths, your learned expertise, your energy and impact, and your sense of contribution. It is the work where you are not just competent, it's where you're truly alive and engaged, and you can solve problems naturally, and you see the patterns that others miss. You bring insight, judgment, creativity, or calm to situations where others simply struggle. And here's what I want you to understand. Your zone of genius is often hiding inside the work other people praise you for, but you dismiss because it feels easy. I'll say that again. Your zone of genius is often hiding inside the work other people praise you for, but you dismiss because it feels easy. That is one of the biggest mistakes I see job seekers make. They think their value has to come from what was hard. But sometimes your greatest value comes from what feels obvious to you. The way you simplify complexity, the way you calm a room, the way you build trust quickly, or see that strategic message inside messy information. Perhaps the way you anticipate stakeholder concerns before anyone else does, and the way you turn chaos into a plan. Because it comes naturally, you're underestimating it. But to someone else, that may be exactly the skill they're hiring for. So let's walk through the 4 zones in a practical way. First, your zone of incompetence. Now, I really don't love that label, especially for job seekers, because it does sound harsh. But all it really means is this. There are things that you are not naturally good at, do not enjoy, and probably should not be spending much of your time doing. Maybe you're not strong in highly detailed financial modeling, or maybe you struggle with repetitive admin tasks, or you're not energized by cold outreach. That doesn't mean you're incapable. It means that this is not where your best contribution lives. Second, let's talk about your zone of competence. These are the things you can do. You're fine with them, you manage them, they're part of your job, but they do not differentiate you. They do not represent your strongest value. You can do them, but they're not the reason someone should hire you into a bigger role. Third, your zone of excellence. This one can be tricky. Your zone of excellence includes the things you're very good at, maybe even praised for, but they may not deeply energize you anymore. This is where many corporate professionals get stuck, because you can build an entire career around your zone of excellence and still be unfulfilled. You are good at work, people rely on you for it, you get rewarded, and you become known for it. But privately, you may feel like, I can do this, but I do not want this to be the only thing I'm known for. And this is especially common for experienced professionals. You may be excellent at execution, but ready for strategy. You may be managing urgent requests, but ready to shape priorities. And then there is your zone of genius. This is where your strongest contribution lives. This is the work that energizes you, creates value, and aligns with the kind of professional you are becoming. It is not just what you have done, it is what you want to be known for next. That distinction matters because your career story should not only explain your past, it should position your future. And why this matters in today's job market is because generic experience is not enough. Hiring teams are overwhelmed, recruiters are scanning quickly, job postings are overloaded, applicant pools are crowded. And many candidates are saying similar things. I'm strategic, collaborative, results driven, strong communicator, a problem solver. None of those are bad, but they're just not enough because they do not tell the employer where you are distinct. They do not tell them what kind of problems you solve best. They do not tell them what environment brings your strongest work. They do not tell them how you think. They do not tell them why you and now. Your zone of genius helps answer that. It gives you language for your positioning. So instead of saying, I'm a strong communicator, you might say, my strength is translating complex business priorities into clear messaging that helps leaders build trust with employees, stakeholders, and customers. That is much stronger. Another example would be instead of saying, I'm good at project management, you might say, I'm at my best when I'm bringing structure to fast moving, ambiguous work and helping cross functional teams move from ideas to execution. That tells me so much more. A clear connection between your strengths, your energy, and the business impact you create. Let's talk about your career story. Many job seekers simply tell the career story chronologically. They start with when you graduated, then the company you worked at, then you moved into this role, and then joined that team. That's a timeline. That's not a career story. A career story answers 3 questions: who you are professionally, what problems you solve, why does your experience make sense for this opportunity in front of you? And your zone of genius helps you connect those dots. I want you to ask yourself, when I'm working in my zone of genius, what changes because of me? Do decisions become more clear? Do teams move faster? Do leaders communicate better? Do employees feel more informed? Does risk get reduced? Does revenue grow? This is where your career story becomes more than professional reflection. It becomes business value. And then connect it to the role you want. Ask yourself, how does my zone of genius solve the problems this employer is hiring for? That is the bridge. That is what too many job seekers miss. They talk about themselves, but they do not connect their strengths to the employer's needs. Your career story should make the employer think, that is exactly what we need. Now let's talk about networking and applying your zone of genius. Because this is where many job seekers miss another huge opportunity. They treat networking like it's asking for help. They might say things like, I'm looking for a new role, let me know if you hear anything. Or I'd love to pick your brain, or I'm exploring opportunities in communications. Again, none of that is wrong, but it doesn't give people enough information to help you. Most people cannot connect you to opportunities if they do not understand what you are best at and what you're looking for. Your zone of genius gives people language to remember you by, and that matters because networking is not just about who you know. It's about what they associate with you. When your name comes up, what do people think? And that is what I want for you. You want people to have a clear mental file for you. So instead of networking with a vague message, you say, I'm exploring roles where I can use my strengths in executive communications, stakeholder alignment, and translating complex business priorities into clear messaging. That is the work that energizes me most, and it is where I have created the strongest impact. That is much more useful. Now the other person knows what to listen for, and now they know what kind of opportunities may be relevant for you right now. Now let's bring this to the interview and applying your zone of genius. This is where decisions become especially powerful. What gives you energy at work and what takes away energy from you? If you're not prepared for this question, you may answer too casually. You might say, I love working with people. I don't like micromanagement. Well, that may be very true, but it's just not enough. Or you might say something like, I like being creative. I don't like repetitive work. Again, that may be true, but It may also create concerns depending on the role. In an interview, your answer needs to be honest, but it also needs to be thoughtful. You're not trying to pretend everything energizes you. That is just not believable. But you also do not want to accidentally raise a red flag because you didn't connect your answer to the role. Remember, employers are listening for fit. They are asking, will this person thrive here? Will this person be engaged? Will this person handle the hard parts of the role? And will this person add value in the areas that we need most? So when you answer this question, use a structure. Here is the structure I recommend. First, name what gives you energy. Second, connect it to the work. Third, give an example of impact. Fourth, name what drains you carefully and professionally. Fifth, show self-awareness around how you manage it. Here's an example. I get the most energy from work that requires me to bring clarity to complexity. I enjoy taking a lot of information, understanding the business context, and turning it into messaging or plans that help people move forward. In my last role, that showed up during a major organizational change where I partnered with leaders to create clear employee communications, manager talking points, and FAQs that reduced confusion and helped teams understand what was changing. What tends to drain me is when there is no clear decision-making process or when priorities shift without context. I've learned to manage that by asking clarifying questions early, documenting decisions, and making sure stakeholders are aligned before work moves too far ahead. That's a strong answer. It is honest, it is mature, and it does not pretend everything is perfect. It shows your strengths and your self-awareness. And that's what hiring teams are looking for. Now let's talk about some red flags. Not all red flags mean someone is a bad candidate. Sometimes they simply mean the person is not aligned for that specific role. And this is a critical distinction. Let's say someone is interviewing for a client-facing account manager role, and they say, I love dealing with people. That gives me energy, but what takes energy away is when clients push back on my ideas. That answer matters because in an account manager role, clients will push back a lot. They will question ideas, they will change direction, they'll ask for revisions, challenge recommendations, delay approvals, and sometimes reject strong work. So if a client pushes back, drains you deeply, it may not be the right role. It means the role may require a type of resilience, influence, and emotional stamina that does not align with their energy. Maybe they'd be better in a role where they still work with people, but not constantly pitching ideas to external clients. Or maybe they would thrive in an internal communications, training operations, or relationship management role with a different dynamic. This is why self-awareness is so important, because the goal is not to win any job. The goal is to land the right job, a job that uses your strengths, a job that stretches you in the right ways, a job where the hard parts are hard, but they're not soul-sucking, and a job where you can perform and sustain that performance. And here is what I see job seekers get wrong. They try to be the perfect candidate for every role. They read the job description and think, I need to match everything. So they flatten themselves. They become generic. They say that they're good at everything. They say they are flexible, adaptable, strategic, detail-oriented, collaborative, and comfortable in ambiguity. And yes, some of these things may be true. But when you try to be everything, you become hard to remember. Strong positioning requires choice, and you need to know, what do I want to be known for? Where do I create the most value? What kind of work energizes me? What kind of problems do I solve best? What kind of environment brings out my strongest contribution? This is not about limiting yourself. It's about making yourself easier to understand, because hiring teams do not have time to decode you. You have to help them see the fit. So how do you actually identify your zone of genius? Let me give you a few reflection questions. First, what work gives you energy even when it's challenging? This is important because your zone of genius does not mean the work is easy. It means the work is meaningful and energizing. You may still be tired after doing it, but it is a satisfying kind of tired. Second, what do people consistently come to me for? Clarity? Judgment? writing, strategy, organizing messy projects, execution, or insight? Other people often see our strengths before we do. Third, what problems do you solve repeatedly? I want you to look for patterns across different roles, teams, industries, and projects. What problems keep showing up for you? Maybe you're always brought in when communication is unclear, or you are always asked to manage sensitive stakeholders, or you're always trusted with high visibility work. Maybe you are always the one who turns strategy into action. That pattern is a clue. And fourth, what accomplishments am I most proud of and why? Do not just list your accomplishments. Ask yourself, what made it meaningful? Was it the complexity, the visibility, the people impact, the strategic thinking, creativity, the transformation, pressure, or the result? Fifth, what do you not want to keep doing, even if you're good at it? This is a big one. Sometimes your next career move is not about proving what you can do. It is about choosing what you no longer want to be hired to do. And that is especially true for experienced professionals. Just because you can do something does not mean it should be the center of your next role. So once you identify your zone of genius, you need to turn it into language, because clarity inside your own head is not enough. You need words you can use in your resume, on your LinkedIn profile, networking, and in interviews. And here are a few sentence starters. I'm at my best when I create the most value by the work that energizes me the most is I tend to be the person teams come to when, and my strongest contribution is I thrive in environments where I'm known for. So let me give you a few broader examples. I'm best at when I'm helping leaders communicate clearly through complexity. I create the most value by turning ambiguous business priorities into clear communications plans. I thrive in environments where communication has a real business purpose, not just activity for the sake of activity. And I'm known for bringing calm, clarity, and structure to fast-moving situations. This is the kind of language that helps people understand you quickly. And in a hiring process, that is uber important. Using this in your resume and on LinkedIn. Your zone of genius should show up in your professional summary, not as a vague statement, but as a positioning statement. So instead of saying experienced communications professional with strong writing and stakeholder management skills, try this one. Communications leader known for translating complex business priorities into clear, audience-focused messaging that builds trust, strengthens alignment, and supports change. That is so much more powerful. Do you see the difference? The stronger version tells me what you do and how you do it, and why it matters. Your LinkedIn About section should reflect this, not just your career history, your professional point of view. Your zone of genius helps you answer what you want to be known for, what kind of work you want to do more of, and what value you will bring to employers. This is how you become more discoverable and more memorable. Now, how to apply this when answering the question, tell me about yourself. Most candidates enter this as a career timeline, but a stronger answer starts with positioning. And here's the framework. Start with your professional identity, naming your zone of genius. Connect it to your experience and bridge it to the role you're interviewing for. Here's an example. I'm a corporate communications professional with a strong focus on helping organizations clearly communicate through change. The work that energizes me most is taking complex information, understanding what different audiences need, and turning it into messaging that builds trust and alignment. Over the past several years, I've done that through internal communications, executive messaging, change communication, and cross-functional campaigns. What drew me to this role is the opportunity to support communications that are closely tied to business priorities and employee engagement. That is a strong answer, not your career history. It tells the interviewer who you are, it shows what energizes you, and it connects to your experience. And it creates alignment with the role. That is much stronger than walking them through your resume job by job. How to avoid oversharing. I want to share a word of caution on oversharing. When you talk about what drains you, be honest. But be careful. Do not turn that answer into a complaint. I would encourage you not to say, I hate difficult managers or I don't like being micromanaged. Even if there's truth underneath those statements, that language will create concern. So instead, translate it into professional language. Instead of saying, I hate micromanagement, say, I do my best work when there's clarity on the outcome and trust in how I get there. I value regular check-ins and feedback, but I'm most effective when I have room to take ownership. That's the difference between venting and positioning. You are still being honest, but you are showing good judgment. Let's go back to the original point. That question, what gives you energy and what takes energy away, can save employers money. Why? Because misalignment is very expensive. Hiring the wrong person is very expensive. Replacing someone is expensive. Performance issues are expensive. Disengagement is expensive. I've measured them all, and they are very expensive. But more importantly, from the job seeker's perspective, taking the wrong role is expensive too. It costs you time and confidence and momentum. It can make you question your abilities when the real issue was fit. That is why I want job seekers to stop thinking the goal is to convince every employer to choose them. The goal is mutual fit. You are evaluating them just as much as they are evaluating you. And when you understand your zone of genius, you can ask better questions. You will listen differently, and you will notice whether the role is aligned with how you do your best work. And you can stop ignoring red flags just because you want the offer. Because landing a job is not the same as landing the right job. So before your next interview, ask yourself, what part of this role appears to align most with my zone of genius? And what part of this role might drain me? What questions do I need to ask to understand whether this role is truly aligned? These questions will change how you show up. You will sound more grounded, more confident, and you will sound less rehearsed and more self-aware. And that is powerful. So let's bring this all together. Your zone of genius is not just a personal development concept. It is a career strategy tool. It helps you understand where you create the most value. It helps you stop chasing roles that look good on paper but feel wrong in practice. It will help you tell a stronger career story and networking with more clarity. It will help you answer interview questions with more confidence. It will help employers understand not just what you've done, but where you will thrive. Because the truth is, hiring managers are not only asking, can this person do the job? They are also asking, will this person succeed here? Will they be energized by the work? Will they make my job easier? And will they bring strengths this team actually needs? And when you know your zone of genius, you can help them answer those questions fast. And you can answer them for yourself too. So here is what I want you to take away from today's episode. You do not need to be good at everything. You do not need to be the perfect candidate for every role. You do not need to flatten your experience to fit every job posting. You need to know where you create the most value, where you do your best work, and how to communicate that clearly. Because your dream job is not just the job that chooses you. It is the job where your strengths, energy, experience, and ambition are aligned. And that is what we're aiming for, not just employment. We're aiming for alignment, growth, impact, and meaningful work. And that starts with knowing your zone of genius. If this episode resonated with you, take a few minutes to answer this today. What gives me energy at work? And what takes energy away? Your answer may reveal more about your next career move than any job posting ever could. Thank you for listening to Career Ambitions. I am Joanne Sparrow, and I'm here to help you stop guessing. Start positioning yourself with confidence and land work that aligns with the career you actually want. See you next time. Thank you so much for listening to Career Ambitions. If this episode gave you a new perspective, a practical takeaway, or even that little spark of confidence you needed, I would love for you to follow the show and leave a review. To celebrate the launch of Career Ambitions, I am running a special giveaway until May 30th, 2026. You could win 3 months of free coaching with yours truly, plus a pair of Apple earbuds. To enter, leave a review where you're listening today. Each review counts as an entry into a giveaway. The draw will be held on May 30th, and I cannot wait to celebrate one lucky listener with 3 months of career coaching to help them move forward with more clarity and confidence. Your next career move deserves a strategy. And if you're looking for more support, connect with me at Career Coach Joe on Instagram or joannesparrow.com to take your next step. See you in the next episode of Career Ambitions.